listening to Philly Who, the podcast that tells the stories of the doers, thinkers, and performers of Philadelphia. My name is Kevin Schmidlin, and today I'm talking with Lindsey Scannapieco. Lindsey is the founder and managing partner of Scout, an urban design collective that specializes in repurposing vacant spaces. Their claim to fame so far is the Bok Building, a giant 8-story vocational school that takes up an entire city block in South Philly. In this episode, you'll hear how in 2014, while Lindsey was doing work with Scout in London, Bok went up for auction, and she saw an opportunity.
I saw this website about these schools for sale in Philadelphia, and somebody was like, you know what, why don't you just do it? Worst case, you'll learn something from it. You probably won't get it. And I was like, yeah, definitely not.
But Lindsey would win the bid for Bok, and as you'll hear, she was a little intimidated.
I thought everybody knows something I don't. I'm the youngest person. I'm the only female. I have made a huge mistake.
She would get right to work, and in only 4 weeks, she and her team opened up a bar on the roof of the building. It was a smash hit, but it also was controversial.
It ended up being so successful, and in this age of Instagram, we got girls posing with a bottle of Prosecco on a closed school. That is not a good image.
Stay tuned to hear how Lindsey and the Bok team has worked with the community to revive the space, which now features 130 different businesses. All this and more about Lindsey, Scout, and the revitalization of the Bok Building, now on Philly Who. I'm your host, Kevin Schmidlin. Stay tuned. Now, though Lindsey founded Scout while living in London, she originally hails from Philadelphia and spent her first few years in the Fairmount area. Her father, Tom Scannapieco, is actually a well-known luxury real estate developer in Philadelphia, and though Lindsey reluctantly accepts the title of real estate developer now, entering her father's industry wasn't always her plan.
I told him never, ever, ever, ever will I ever do that. And he said, I think you'd really like it. And I said, I would hate it. You don't know anything about me. And he would try to tell me, there's a lot of different ways to do it. There's a lot of different parts of it. It's a huge umbrella that touches so many different parts of city life and home life and work life and hospitality, and it can be anything. And I did not see it that way. I said, no, I have zero interest in that. And so my interest when I was younger was to go into arts business. And it's funny because in the end, I feel like I am working in the arts business and that I work with a lot of creatives. I work with a lot of artists. And I actually, believe that in our own way, we're a creative firm, and our background is more as urban designers, which is still what I call myself. I'm still not 100% comfortable with the developer term and kind of all the baggage that it brings with it. But I would say I was very much a reluctant developer. And the way that I kind of got here was that we were doing a lot of projects in London on how you could reuse vacant or underutilized assets. And one of the last projects we did was looking at a parking garage in a social housing tower. And nobody had cars, so there was no real use of it. And it was starting to attract antisocial behavior. And so we put together an entire plan for how it could actually be a place of skills training, job creation, a way that makers and the residents of that estate could work together to create new opportunities for kind of everybody in that neighborhood. Had a lot of political support. We identified partners. We did community engagement projects. We put together a business plan. We put together physical interventions for how that space could be improved. And in the end, it ended up going on a shelf, which I think is the story of a lot of grand plans, unfortunately. And somebody from the community said, well, why don't you still just do this? You did all the work. And we said, well, we can't. That's not really something we can do. And they said, well, why don't you just buy a building and do it? I said, well, A, I can't afford to buy a building. And B, then I'd have to call my dad and tell him he was right.
Yeah.
So I definitely can't do that.
Yeah, that's the number one reason, I think.
But it started to kind of put the idea in my head that we were doing a lot of the work and the process that goes into development. And just because I didn't like the way that development was always being done doesn't mean that I shouldn't do it. That actually might be an opportunity. And I said, well, I can't afford a building. And I think I called my dad and said, here's a funny thought or story. And he said, well, maybe you could in Philadelphia. And around that same time, somebody had sent me this link to phlschoolsales.com, which is how I found out about Bok. And I mean, still even at the time, although it wasn't, an extremely expensive building on a per square cost level, it was still, something beyond what I could comprehend. And so that started the adventure of what is now, I guess now we call ourselves an urban design and development practice, but it wasn't our initial intention or certainly my initial aspiration.
So let's back up. What brought you to London in the first place?
So I went out there for grad school. So I did a master's degree in city design and social science at the London School of Economics. And my focus there was on an area adjacent to the London Olympic site called Hackney Wick, and looking at a neighborhood that at the time was considered to have one of the largest concentrations of artists in all of Europe. But most of it was very informal. It was in a lot of squats and kind of vacant warehouses. It was a community that was pretty spatially divided. It had some real physical barriers, had a river, the River Lee, a train line running through it, for example, and thinking about how you could actually stitch that community, different pieces of that community together, but also stitch it then into this Olympic site that was seeing all this kind of investment and change. And it was quite a striking change from what it was historically, and thinking about how that could maybe be done in a way that provided opportunity for those kind of existing residents.
So your claim to fame so far in London is about refrigerators.
That's right.
Correct?
Yeah. So while we were doing work in Hackney Wick, one of the things that would always come up as we were talking to residents was that they would talk about the fact that on the Olympic Park, where at that time the Zaha Hadid Aquatic Stadium was being built, which is one of the kind of most grand architectural expressions, I would say, of the Olympic project. It's a stunning building. That on that exact site actually used to be something affectionately known as the Fridge Mountain, which was a fridge depot that basically there was a lapse in recycling policy in Europe. And so what happened is that all these fridges started to pile up. And people would talk about the Fridge Mountain kind of quite romantically, because I think it was just such a contrasting symbol to this kind of new, shiny, stark-attack aquatic stadium being built. And it was just such a visual contrast and kind of reminder of the change that community had seen. And so when we talked to people about it, they said, "Oh, did you ever hear about the Fridge Mountain?" And it was almost something of folklore in the neighborhood. And we said, not a lot of people are going to know about that story when they come for the Olympics. They're going to just see the new sexy Zaha Hadid Stadium. And so we came up with a kind of very short project. It just was 2 weeks, where we built a cinema called Films on Fridges out of fridges in an attempt to resurrect at least the ethos of the Fridge Mountain. And the idea was that we would play sports films on it over the exact same dates as the Olympics, just 1 year earlier. And so the idea was that people were excited about what was to come, but they would maybe also understand what was there originally. And so we opened this cinema, Films on Fridges, and we showed everything from Rocky to Pumping Iron to we did the world premiere of a soccer documentary called Pelada, really wide range of films, and it sold out. And shockingly to us became, I think Time Out called it the hottest cinema in London that summer. And from there, we got an email from a large arts institution asking if we only worked in fridges. And we said no. And that was kind of the start of Scout. That was the start of us as kind of a company, although, with kind of little aspiration, I think, at that point to of where it would take us or how it would evolve. The idea was really that we wanted to try to do something, and we were really interested in the history of a site and understanding and looking at kind of creatively how to both educate and entertain and showcase different narratives of space.
The day that it sells out, you see that people are into it and you're going to have a full house every night. What goes through your mind?
I still describe it as one of the most exhilarating feelings in the entire world. And you only get those feelings once or twice in a project, but they're the things that you kind of continue. It's that adrenaline that I think becomes addictive. And when we first opened the bar the first summer, Le Bok Fin here, it was that same feeling. But that first time is a time that you'll never. I remember us just absolutely just jumping up and down. We actually, our kind of office was in a container, but not one of these like sexy containers with windows and all that. It was actually like a legitimate container that we just locked everything into at night. And I remember just going into it and us closing the door and just like screaming for just a second in kind of excitement. And then kind of going out and, trying to pull it together and stay professional and seem like this was everything that you thought it would be.
Right. We knew this all along.
But it wasn't without its challenges. We got rained out, which was always a challenge in anything outdoors. Because we had more people show up, we didn't initially have enough bathrooms. That was a fun challenge. So, things that you wouldn't anticipate, good problems.
Good problems to have, exactly. So your dad suggested buying a space.
Well, somebody in London, actually, a member of the community that we were working with suggested it. And I kind of said, well, that's kind of a crazy idea. I don't really think we could do that. And, I saw this website about these schools for sale in Philadelphia. And I'm obviously from Philadelphia. And so there was definitely obviously strong personal ties here. And I called a couple people in Philadelphia and said, I'm thinking about submitting for this. And they were like, that's totally bonkers. And I was like, I know. And somebody was like, you know what? Why don't you just do it? Worst case, you'll learn something from it. You probably won't get it. And I was like, yeah, definitely not. So that seems like a good idea. We'll just do it as an experience. And so we submitted a bid through this website, phlschoolsales.com. It was like on a 2-page application. We filled it out.
Did you specifically choose on the website this building?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So my family is from South Philadelphia. My dad's cousin had come to Bok. I knew of Bok. The scale and architecture of this building was really fascinating just from the beginning. But I think at a more important level was the idea that a lot of our work had been working with kind of makers and artists and non-traditional work users. And we knew that this was a vocational school. And so I said, even if everything has been stripped from the building, there's got to be some assets that remain. So whether that's a concrete floor or a sink, or the fact that a room might just have a lot of electrical capacity, those are things that are actually so valuable, and they're really expensive and hard to bring into a new building. And if you did, then those types of users could never afford to use them. And so that was kind of the basis, was actually, let's just use the building in how it was intended to be used, or use the spaces in ways that they were intended to be used, and kind of respond to that space. The idea, again, of kind of going back, I think, to that other project I mentioned, of kind of looking at things that are usually a challenge, but saying, how can you actually see that as an opportunity? And so we have great examples of that today. We have a woodworker, for example, in the old wood shop. We have a catering company in the old culinary arts kitchen. We have a wholesale bakery, which is affectionately called Machine Shop Boulangerie, because they are in the old machine shop, because that had enough power for their equipment. And it had concrete floors, which was really practical for a wholesale bakery and really easy to kind of wipe down and clean. So those are just kind of some examples. And that was always our approach. That was our proposal. But we submitted, and kind of embarrassingly, I have to admit that we missed the tour date.
Oh my gosh. So you hadn't seen the interior of the building?
No. I had kind of seen the information they had supplied as a part of this website, but it was pretty surface level. And I kind of thought, well, if we get further down the process, we'll kind of better understand it. I mean, the chances of this going anywhere are so slim anyway. Let's just kind of, submit and see where it goes. And so then we found out that we got shortlisted, and they called me and said, do you want to revise your price? I said, okay, well, is it high? Is it low? How many other people were shortlisted? And they said, oh, I can't tell you any of that. I said, okay, well, how many people submitted? I said, we can't tell you that. I said, okay, well, I think I'm just going to hold because I don't really know what else to do. And I now have learned that I believe there was 8 or 9 submissions, and I believe the shortlist was about half of that.
Okay.
And then I found out that we had been selected, and I couldn't believe that. And then I found out that we were the highest bidder, and I said, oh shit.
Yeah. What goes through your mind at that moment?
Well, I thought everybody knows something I don't. I'm the youngest person. I'm the only female. I have made a huge mistake. And so on our first kind of tour through the building, I assembled this army of older, experienced men.
Yeah.
And it was, we had somebody from historic preservation work. We had somebody that did MEP, mechanical, electrical, plumbing. A structural engineer, architects, developers who had done reuse and renovations of kind of historic properties before. It was maybe 30 of us, and I brought a photographer that I emailed, and he said he could come over his lunch break.
Yeah.
And that was Conrad Benner.
Streets department.
And so he was the only other person my age, and we started off by coming in and we said, we have no idea what we're going to find. And I said, I have no idea. I'm always happy to admit when I don't know something. And I said, so please raise your hand, point things out, look at things, tell me the problems. Like, this is the day that all red flags need to be raised. And we walk through the building, and over that tour, nothing, at least at that point, had come out as totally scare-worthy. And I remember Conrad and I came up to the 8th floor of the building, and it was just us. I don't know. Everybody was looking at maybe a roof or something else. I'm not exactly sure. And we just looked at each other, and we just said, oh my God, this is insane. And it's funny because since then, at the time he was working at a job, like I said, he came over on his lunch break. We didn't know each other very well. And obviously now he's just such a leader in the Philadelphia photography community and creative community, and has kind of jumped to great fame.
Yeah.
And so it's funny to kind of look back and think of the journey that we've all been on over that period of time.
So you take the tour with all these folks. At this point, is the building yours?
So we're in a period of due diligence. So we're kind of exploring. We're looking for that big skeleton that scared everybody else off. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the big problem that's going to make me say, oh my gosh, this makes no sense.
And did you find it?
No, for better or for worse, we still haven't found that.
Okay.
We found lots of problems, but none big enough to actually run out of the room.
Yeah. Well, maybe other people didn't have the confidence that you had, that they weren't big enough to run out of the room.
Yeah, I actually think the reality is that the scale of the building scared a lot of people. It's a huge building. It's 340,000 square feet. It occupies an entire city block. It's 9 stories high. I think people had a hard time with that scale. I also think that and unfortunately, the reality is that a lot of schools, when they close, either sit empty and then get demolished, they become charter schools, or they become market rate residential. That's kind of those are the kind of traditional paths. And my understanding, and I've never actually been formally told, was that the other proposals were for market rate residential. And so in order to kind of core through this building and install all new bathrooms and all new kitchens and systems, it would have been so expensive that's probably the reason they bid low. But we were actually looking at not kind of picking and poking and prodding and changing the building. We were looking at how can we use it just the way it is today.
How can we fit what the building wants rather than make the building fit what we want?
Exactly.
Amazing.
So it hasn't been without its challenges, but I think that's the real reason that people didn't go for it.
Yeah. So the purchase goes through.
Yep.
Did I hear correctly that within 4 weeks of you having the building, Bok Bar opened?
That's right. So basically, we came up with this idea. So in the beginning, I couldn't get a bank to give me financing.
Right. That's another question I have for you. How the heck did you come up with $1.5 million?
So I was talking to banks about this idea of what we wanted to build here. And they said, okay, what are the market comps? What are examples? How do you know there's demand for that type of space? There was no examples that I could point to, especially in this neighborhood. And they said, we just don't know if anybody will ever come there. You're in a residential neighborhood. Yep, you're close to Center City. Yeah, you're 6 blocks from East Passyunk Avenue. Yes, you're a couple miles from the Navy Yard, but you're near everything and next to nothing. And so for that reason, we really wanted to do something that could kind of prove to a bank that we were somewhere that people would want to come. The other issue or challenge for us was that a lot of developers sit on projects for years. They get everything together, they get all their plans, they get all of their funding, they get they kind of assemble and consider and test and strategize. And we kind of said, we actually want to prove to people that we can get something done. As a young female, I think not many people thought that we could. And so there was also something about saying, let's show people that we can and know how to get things done in the city of Philadelphia. And then the third and kind of most important thing for us was that we asked ourselves, what's the best way to talk to the neighborhood? And we said, well, how do you talk to your actual neighbors at wherever you live? And I said, the way I talk to my neighbors is I sit outside on the stoop and I have a drink. That's how we talk to our neighbors. And the amount of neighbors that can come to a 7 p.m. meeting on a Wednesday night or choose to or take the initiative to are a very small segment of this neighborhood in this city. And that the best way to talk to people would be to invite them up for a drink and invite them up to a drink in a really special space so that they could see what we see and they could understand why we're excited. So that was the premise. That was the entire premise. There was nothing more grandiose than that. I talked to a lot of bar operators in the city about running that space with me, and all of them thought I was totally crazy. I had, people asking me what our marketing and PR strategy was. We said we didn't have any money for that. They said, who's ever going to come? My dad told me to build 2 walls so that if I invited 20 friends, it would feel busy.
Oh my gosh.
He said, who's going to come? Nobody's ever going to know about this. This is crazy. And so we built that ourselves that first year. My team and I, we sanded and painted and hammered and physically built that the first year. Because we didn't really have any money to do it. Well, most of our budget actually got wiped out on plumbing, which turns out is an extremely expensive and unsexy piece, but ends up taking a lot of your budget. And so to get the toilets working up there was a monumental task. And so everything else kind of just had to work around whatever was left.
It revolves around the toilets.
Once we had working toilets, that was kind of the key. And so we opened that bar that first year for 22 nights. And over the 22 nights, we had over 30,000 people come through the door. And I was able to close on our construction loan. And so I invited anybody that was thinking about getting involved in the project in any capacity up to the bar. And when they saw it full with people, they said, wow, something's going to happen here. And then the other piece of it was that, turns out bars actually are a pretty good business. And so then I also had an anchor tenant. And so now that's an established operator, but it's an anchor tenant that pays great rent for the building. I call it the icing on the cake. It kind of allows the rest of the mix to work. And so it's now in its fourth year. But for us, it was also an example of kind of minimum viable product. And that's something I know gets talked a lot about in the tech world. And I think in the real estate world, for a lot of reasons, it's pretty unflexible and unable to kind of be something that's a place of experimentation and testing. But for us, it was actually really important that we were able to kind of empty out our small kitty and say, let's just test this and see if it works. And if it doesn't work, then let's go back to the drawing board. But we had very little to use. And for better and for worse, it totally exceeded our expectations. We thought that people would come, but we had no idea of the power of a sunset in the Instagram age, which is a beautiful and terrifying thing. And now we do probably around 2,000 people through a night.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the, when I have people visit town, it's one of the destinations that I bring them to, because I just said, like, if you want to see the skyline, you need to come here. When the bankers were telling you that, you're near everything and next to nothing, did you even think that this could be the thing that people would want to be next to?
Yes, I think we thought it's a beautiful building. I knew that there was some incredible creatives in this city with great businesses and making great products, and that especially in this neighborhood, people were living in 2-story small row houses. We didn't have big, generous spaces. That, North Philadelphia, yes, there's a lot of warehouses. That's not South Philly. That's not the typology of this neighborhood. And so saying that people would be able to use the space, and I didn't know exactly how. I can't tell you how many times I've had somebody say, oh, can you pull up a plan and write on it exactly what's going to go in what space? And I've never been able to do that, and I never will be able to do that, because a lot of times, and this is something that a practitioner that I really like, Theester Gates, said that's kind of stuck with me, is to take the master out of master plan. I don't know what's best in a space. I know that if you offer somebody a space and you provide, the practical essentials, and you provide transparent pricing, and you provide just a usable space, people will think of how to use that. And I think one of my favorite examples of that is actually the hairdressing salon here at Bok, Fringe. And Erin, the owner of Fringe, is fantastic. And when she first came to me and said, I want to come to Bok and I'm okay on an upper floor, I said, really? How's that going to work for your business? And she said, Lindsey, people don't come to a hair salon because they pass it on the street. They come to a hair salon because they see somebody and they say, I love your hair. Where did you get it done? She said, I haven't had a walk-in customer in 8 years. And I said, oh my God, you're right. But that's an example where I never would have said, oh, let's put a hair salon on the 5th floor. But I had to say, you're right. That makes sense. That's great. Let me know how we can make that happen. And that's an example of somebody who was on East Passyunk Avenue. They were on the commercial corridor, and they were able to grow, expand, and stay in this neighborhood. And, I think that's a really great example of not kind of always knowing what something is going to be, but say, I want the space to have this intention or this kind of diversity of use, which is really important.
So there was a lot of negative press around the repurposing of this building for various reasons. Did you expect that to be the case when getting into this venture?
I think that I didn't anticipate how successful the bar was going to be that first year. And so I have come over time to really understand where that perspective came from. I think school closures are a terrible thing. Schools are not only usually located centrally in our neighborhoods, but the architecture of a school is something of civic pride, civic gathering. It is so hard for a community when a school closes. And I think a lot of people were very upset about the school closures here, as they should be. But I think the reality is that isn't a Philadelphia problem. In Philadelphia, we closed 32 schools. In Chicago, it was over 60. In Detroit, it was over 110. This is an issue that a lot of cities are facing. And I think that a lot of the anger and a frustration that we heard was about school closures. And I understand that anger and I agree with it. And I hope that we don't have to close schools again. However, this school, there was a decision at the school district level to sell this school. And I was not in Philadelphia at the time that that decision was made. And there was a lot of things that could have happened to this building. We also picked a reuse that was probably more public facing than any of those other options that we talked about. If it's a charter school, most people don't always go into it if you don't have a kid who's attending that school. If it's housing, that only hits a specific segment of that population. And so we picked a very public use. And so also we were more public facing. And so that was also going to impact the perception of the space and the project. The other thing is that the first thing that we did was open a bar. And, I kind of thought of that as, that'll be a good way to show people what's possible. It ended up being so successful. And in this age of Instagram, we got girls posing with a bottle of Prosecco on a closed school. That is not a good image. I hadn't fathomed that image because it was so hard for me to even fathom that could and would work, that I hadn't really thought about what that would look like if you stepped away. And so I understand that frustration. I don't disagree with where it came from. I think, and what I hope, is that over time we've shown, and we're still trying to continue to show, that this building is much more than a bar. The bar is under 5% of the building's square footage. We have over 130 businesses here. Of those businesses, 85% of our businesses are run by people who live in South Philly, residents of South Philadelphia. And there is a wide diversity of users, everything from a boxing gym to glass blowers, a tattoo parlor, a daycare, ESL classes, a Cambodian nonprofit, a carpentry workshop, a textile designer, a tattoo studio, paint-based artists, ceramic-based artists, screen printers. And so this is actually a space that has a lot of different types of activity in it, not just the bar. But in the beginning, it was just the bar. And so I now understand and see, I think, a lot of the kind of visceral response that we got in the beginning. And I understand that. But we really want this building to be a place that has a diversity of use, that has lots of different types of people coming into this building at lots of different times of day. And the bar, is a part of that, but it's not all of that. And I hope that over time we're able to continually prove that as this building grows.
Has the community's attitude softened in the years that the building has started to fulfill that prophecy of being something that's diverse and for the public?
So our neighborhood never was the one that was critical.
Oh, interesting.
Our neighbors and our community and our alumni have always been supportive. It was people outside of this neighborhood, people in West Philly and North Philly. I remember there was a day that somebody was here handing out flyers about there were some protesters outside. And we had an alumni coming up to have a drink. And the guy handed him this piece of paper and said, "Hey, do you want to learn about this school?" And the alumni said, "What do you know about this school?" And the guy said, "Oh, I know they closed it in 2013. And the guy said, "Yep. And I went to school here. And I'm going to go upstairs and have a drink because I know that this building was being disinvested in, had deferred maintenance and decreasing enrollment, had a lot of challenges, and I support this having it be reused. And if I come outside and you're still here," and I think he used some words that I won't repeat, but the reality is that those are things that I couldn't have said, and it would have made a difference if I said them. And I think that's what's important to for us to remember, is that actually this local neighborhood and the alumni, who are my most important stakeholders, have always been supportive. It was people from outside the community that we heard a lot of the negative feedback from initially. But whenever you do kind of a big project, you're going to have critics. And that's part of the challenge. And it's been certainly part of my experience of kind of aging and maturing in business. So.
Right. So would you say that you have a better toolkit for handling like when a press article hits your desk that's not very favorable?
Sometimes I'm working on it.
Yeah.
I think it's both a terrible and beautiful thing to develop thick skin. I think that I and this building and this project always will to some degree be fragile. And I think it's actually important for spaces to be powerful but fragile at the same time. I think that, there's always something to learn from feedback, even if you don't like to hear it. And there's definitely times where I go, cry in a corner, and that's okay. You're not going to make everybody like you.
You mentioned earlier how you had that moment of joy with the success of the fridge project, and that you also had it with the success of the bar. Where were you when that moment happened?
Well, I remember for our opening, we were trying to get a sign installed, and I had a hammer in my hand, and I was drenched in sweat. It was so hot. I think I still had somebody working on these darn toilets.
Yeah.
I think the plumbers were still there. I think the health department had just left, given us permission within 30 seconds of opening, literally. And I was running around and trying to kind of do the dog and pony in the midst of it. Somebody said, Lindsey, you gotta get changed. You've got to clean yourself up. You look terrible. And so I came downstairs to one of the bathrooms, and I stuck my head in the sink, put some makeup on, put a dress on, and went upstairs, and there was people there that I didn't know. And there's still nights where sometimes I'll come here, whether it's to the bar or to see an installation or an event or even just a party in a tenant space, and I just pinch myself because it is kind of better than I think I imagined. And it's just great to hear and see people enjoying the space, growing their businesses, creating amazing things that are way beyond my abilities. And I think just, being a part of enabling that is fun. I say that one of my favorite things to do is actually ride up and down the elevator and just listen to what people say on their way in and out of the bar and the building. I really sometimes wish I could just be a fly on the wall.
Yeah. So now you're 4 years in. You have how many tenants total?
So we have 130 businesses here today.
Wow.
So
how close to at capacity would you say the building is?
So we're at 50%.
Oh my gosh, only half.
So it's a big building, turns out, and I sometimes joke that it's even bigger than I thought, because I think of how far we've come and how much work we've done, and the fact that there is still another 50% to go is sometimes overwhelming. But that's the amazing and terrifying thing, is that it is such a big building, and that scale also enables really amazing and interesting things to happen. But I can't wait to see how it grows in the next couple of years.
Yeah. Are you intending for 100%?
Yeah, me and the banks. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Oh, totally going to get there. So that's what you'll be driving for over the next few years.
That's right.
Amazing. And then what then?
Oh, God knows. I'll probably just take a little bit of time off. No, I have no idea. I really don't know. I think one of the interesting things that has emerged over the last year or two has been a conversation that's even beyond a national scale about school reuse. The architecture of schools is really specific. So there's one heating system. It's either on or off. There's no kind of ability to shut off one area or one floor or one room. There's these kind of big gang bathrooms. So you have the kind of large girls' room and the large boys' room. And you have these hallways that were made so that when a bell rang, the entire building could empty out into the hallways all at one time. So you have an extreme loss factor and inefficiency from the hallways. And in addition to a lot of other kind of principles and the fact that, schools are built inherently so you're not able to see what's happening inside of them. We're not supposed to be able to see kids, right? But then when we talk about how they get reused, how do you bring back transparency into a building that physically was built to have zero? And so those sorts of conversations and questions are not Bok specific challenges. They're universal challenges. And so, I was talking to somebody in Memphis about a school that they're reusing. Detroit has a school that they're working to kind of make creative workspace. I visited one last fall in Melbourne. Where actually that's a really interesting project because it's actually the opposite, where their real estate market there is so strong and it's such an expensive city that the government has actually purchased an old vocational school to preserve it as affordable artist space. But somewhere even like Japan, which has an aging population, they're having the same challenge with how do you reuse a school. And all of the schools are built in that same way, and that same kind of that physical language is the same. And so that's something we're really interested in, whether or not that's by buying another school or actually just sharing our war stories. I'm not exactly sure, but I think there's been a really interesting conversation, much larger than this building, that's been starting to happen.
So in discussing the story of Bok so far, and even going back to London, you often say we. Who's we?
Yeah, so we have a fantastic team here at Bok. We're a team of a lean and mean team of 9 on our staff, majority women, and it's an interdisciplinary practice. So we have people who do have urban design backgrounds, people who don't have urban design backgrounds, and it is not at all, an exaggeration to say that I could not do this without them. They are absolutely critical to the project, but and so valuable. And I think surrounding yourself by good people is one of the best things that you can do. But I think one of the interesting things is unintentionally it is majority women. And we talk about oftentimes why or how that's happened, because it's kind of strange in an industry that is very male dominated. And one of the things that we go back to is that a lot of our work is about intuition. And sometimes intuition is just as good as a kind of grand plan. And a lot of our businesses are just starting out. And so you don't fully know who will succeed and won't succeed. And so we've actually, we talk to people and understand who they are and what motivates them and what do they want to do and how do they want to grow. And that's a really big part of our leasing process. We've also found that working with people who maybe don't have a big lease knowledge is helpful because we don't have that either. So when somebody says, I have no idea about this section, we can say, oh yeah, actually, I didn't understand that either. Let me help you through it. And actually that is much easier for somebody to understand and to work with. And so I think that's been really helpful. And I think the other thing that we always talk about is that real estate is actually just an industry of people and problems. And that's what I spend most of my day solving. Either with people or problems. And I do believe that women are very good at that. And it's been just incredible to be able to find and grow such a wonderful team that is able to respond and listen and react. But it's not without its challenges. We've definitely had times where somebody still speaks to the men in the room. And, but I'm really feel quite honored to be around strong women who, at least we can joke about it afterwards or comment on it when it does happen and kind of, appreciate, I think, the uniqueness of our team's composition and the opportunity that we have. 48% of our businesses here are actually women businesses, which is huge. And so the city of Philadelphia, the average, I think, is 13%, 12%. It's pretty low. And so the fact that we have so many strong businesses here, I also think is a reflection of kind of the strong women leadership here.
Yeah, for sure. So I have a few questions that I ask all of my guests, just to get different perspectives. If you could send a message to your past self at any point in time, other than just like words of encouragement, would you? And if so, what would you say?
You don't know anything. No, I just think that, there's so many times in your life where you think, oh, I don't want to do that, or I'm not going to do that, or that's not for me, or I'll never, move here, or do this, or be like that. And the reality is you just don't know. Life is an adventure. And I oftentimes when we're talking, I talk to interns or new hires coming into the company, they say, oh, I just don't know what to do, or I'll never do something like that. And I just say, you just don't know. Like, I don't really know where I'm going to be 20 years from now. I had a funder actually recently ask me where I saw myself in 20 years. And I said, oh, in my 50s? I'm sorry, I can't see that far ahead. But I actually think, for me at least, that's been a healthy process, because I think there's been times where I've wanted to, and I think our society kind of asks us to be able to confidently see things. And I have had to learn to let go of that and actually confidently admit that I cannot see things. Yeah. And sometimes there's just as much value in that. And so I think for me, it's about letting go of preconceptions of what I thought at one point in my life.
So from your perspective, in the world of, art and real estate and the confluence of these things, what's the most encouraging thing you see about Philadelphia?
So I guess a couple things come to mind. One is that a lot of young people here feel like they can make a difference. And I think that's an amazing thing. I think so often in big cities, you don't feel that you can have an impact. And I think people here feel that they can. And I think that is incredible. And also, especially in today's kind of climate, really important to feel that you can have an impact and do something that you want to do. And 40% of the businesses here at Bok, I say graduated, but basically started in their living room, and this is their first place of work. And so I work every day with people who have kind of taken the initiative to say, I'm going to take this hobby and turn it into a career. And they are in the very early days of that. But I even think that saying that to themselves or signing that first lease is such a big step. And I'm just so happy to be in a city where a lot of people feel comfortable and able to take that step. Because somewhere like New York or London, you can't do that. The stakes are high. The money requirements are, big. And so I think that is exciting. I think Philadelphia is also this kind of big, small city, which is you can see kind of both sides of the coin, but also means that you get to know other people in the city doing other types of projects that you can collaborate, commiserate, support, advise. And I found that network to also be really helpful.
On the flip side, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing Philadelphia today?
I think obviously there's a big question about the influx of the younger generation, whether or not they will stay, and our schools being able to be a place that people want and choose to send their children to. I think that's obviously a big question and challenge for Philadelphia. I do think that for so long, the city has not had any external pressures on it, which is a good thing, but also means that sometimes we've gotten a bit stuck in our ways. And one of the examples of that, I think, would be parking.
Yeah.
And especially here in South Philadelphia, we call it the secret P word because you're not allowed to say it out loud.
Right.
But, a lot of people have a perception, and even, now that, that won't work because there isn't parking. But there's plenty of other cities that people live in with less parking than we do. I believe we actually have one of the cheapest car ownership rates in the US. And so thinking about how we support and adapt change, while not kind of excluding people who have been here for a long time and have very strong preconceptions of what it means to live here in Philadelphia.
Cool. If you could send a message that would be received by every single Philadelphian, what would you say?
So they had this saying at Bok, which was come to Bok and be okay. And we sometimes say in our office, be okay. And I think there's a sense that everything has to be fantastic and great and be a home run, but you can just be okay. And I think there's something comforting about that, this kind of idea that you always keep it moving, that you kind of consistently keep trying and keep learning and keep listening. And that for any business or idea or relationship, it takes work and it takes responsiveness and it takes listening and learning and growing and pushing, and that's okay.
If you'd like to learn more about Lindsey, Scout, and the Bok journey, you can head over to podphillyhoo.com/Bok. That's BOK. If you liked this show, be sure to subscribe on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're on Apple Podcasts, give us a rating. You can also reach out and follow along on Twitter and Facebook at PodPhillyWho. Music by Lee Rosevere. Podcast art by Lauren Carhart. Special thanks to Alex Feldman, and a very special thanks to Lindsey for being on the show today. For Philly Who, my name is Kevin Schmidlin. See you next week.